Okay, thank you all for coming. We're going to get started. David and I have a little presentation that we're going to jointly do, and then we have some interactive stuff, and hopefully it'll be fun. First, I want to introduce my colleague, David Wetton. David, I didn't really get a chance to, I wanted to have your bio in front of me, but let me just say this, what I know about David. I know that he's an interfaith minister. He's also a business consultant and coach, and he's worked with some people in the London version of the Fortune 500 in the UK. And he's just a wonderful fellow. And actually, he invited me to join him, which is awesome. So, David, I guess you introduced me. That's what you're.
I will do, Angelo. Yes. So I do have to have your bio here. So Angelo is director of the Sacred Inclusion Network, and his experience includes a season in a Japanese dojo as a student of the healing arts and a mentorship with a Chinese tantric Buddhist master. Wow. Angelo is also the originator of Sacred Conversations and the Dialogue Circle method. He's the author of Notes for a New Age and a coach and consultant who has designed, developed and conducted group problem solving, team and community building interventions for clients that include AT&T, Verizon, AC Nielsen, and a branch of the US Department of Commerce. And if you're as intrigued as I, it's going to be a good call.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. So, David, I hope you would take this first part.
Well, you pick up that one, Angelo, because you introduced that slide.
Okay, I'm a big fan of Richard D. Bartlett. If you want to Google what he's about, he's created this thing called what's it called? Micro synergies or something. You could find him on Medium. And this quote that he has this project which involves economic tribes, I'll call them. But anyway, he was trying to sum up the importance of doing what we're doing, I guess, all of us. And he used this quote, which I guess I'll just read. While the biological substrate for life is disintegrating our social fabric, democratic populations are electing dictators and buffoons. Fascism is resurgent. Our ability to make meaning is dissolving. Across this political spectrum, people are responding to the existential dread by retreating into anxious certainties. This is sort of self-evident, I suppose. David, come in any time, please. Yeah, I think of it as there's two kinds of communities. There's secular community and there's spiritual community. And of course, when we talk about spiritual community, it demands some definition. What are you talking about when you use the word spiritual? And David and I have a couple of different definitions, and probably yours is probably a little different also, so we can talk about that. This is my definition, and I'm going to let David speak to his. Mine is simply the felt sense of being connected to everything.
Okay, and this is the one that I've got. I think there's a couple of pictures with that, Angelo. I think if you click it. Yeah. And just what I wanted to add is, I did here in the UK, I did a master's at Durham University Business School on the role of spirituality in the workplace. And the first thing I wanted to say is, actually even from an academic perspective, there's no one agreed definition of spirituality, which in a way makes sense because it's different things to different people. So I'm sharing here is really the one that makes sense to me. And it kicks off really that spirituality isn't religion. It's not about beliefs, creeds and dogmas and assignment to various things, having to believe a certain thing. But it's more about being, as it says here, fully alive and relationships. I think the previous slide showed, if we're talking about interconnectedness, so it's about relationships and also that which gives individually, each of us and collectively, what gives meaning and purpose to life. And I have a sense, again, that seems to me to be front and center as to what's happening now, in the world, that actually people are really asking this question, what is my meaning and purpose? Collectively, what are we doing?
So I'm going to say a lot of this aloud, mostly for Michael, who's on the phone. He won't be able to see it. So
I'm reading it.
okay. Oh, you can see it, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah,
so
it's on my screen.
Yeah, this is my theory, right? So you know, you don't have to believe this or anything like that. Essentially, I think we're in the midst of this big shift from a tribal framework to a universal framework.
Amen.
And as evidence, I can think that you know, you and I can go anywhere in the world. We'll find people that more or less think like us in a lot of different ways. So if you're interested in this theory,
Cool.
you can read about it on this little link here. My favorite example of this is some time ago. I can't remember the name of the pop artist. He had this tune that was called "Happiness" or whatever his name is. I'm drawing a blank. But in any event, he asked people
Donovan?
to make. No, not Donovan. Oh, you should probably put yourself on mute or something, Michael.
Okay.
He asked people to make a kind of a mime of it. And thousands of people all over the world made their own versions of it. And some people in Iran got arrested on it. But it was amazing. There's still a website that exists that has all these different memes or whatever.
And this one is mine. I just wanted to ask people, actually, I'm just looking at the screen here, just put your hand. Who's come across spiral dynamics before? 1, 2, we got 3, we got 4, got a fair splattering of hands. And I've just really put this slide up at the moment. I'm not going to go into any real depth about spiral dynamics, but just to kind of say that actually you can see, it should be there on the screen, that spiral dynamics is one way, it's not the only way, of actually just getting a sense of what might be happening in this current moment. That for me, there is a shift of consciousness. And what I want to say, I was on a call this week with Professor Amy Bradley at the Holt Ashridge Business School, based here in the UK. But very strangely, for a business school, she was using the language that a collective shift is happening, that we are at a turning point. And for me, spiral dynamics is one way of looking at this. And those that understand spiral dynamics, you can see the different colours there. And really, I guess for UK, US, when you see the colour there of orange, where it kind of says actually it's about drive, it's achievement, materialistic, strategic. It's all about kind of that sense. It's about the I, and you could say that's where our economy has been. And we've been moving more towards the green, the human bond, particularly the green movement. So when you move up to the next one, it says egalitarian, it's about approval, equality, community, personalistic, sensitive, pluralistic, including people. That's interesting. So we have been moving that way as well. However, when we talk about a shift in consciousness, if you're interested in exploring this further, the spiral dynamics says that actually when we move up to what it says level 7 and it's yellow, and some people call it teal if you look to other models, but here where it's yellow, there's actually a step change. So there's two things that are really important about this. One, this step change, it is a big change. It's a bigger change we've ever seen before. So that's really interesting. And the second thing I find really interesting is on the ones I mentioned before, all the layers below it they're their own kind of level. They don't include the other levels. They fight against the other levels. They say this is the best level. When you get to yellow, you start to include all the others as well. But the key thing about level is yellow, as you can see, it says it's flex flow. It's interactive. So that slide, that network that we've got, it's kind of saying actually people gravitate to where they need to be. It's more systemic, it's more systems-based, it's ecological, it's flexible, it's emerging. It's about adaptability and integration. So I wanted just to introduce this because at the time when we're thinking about what groups are we part of, this can be very handy to say, actually, just to ask the question ourselves, actually, where is this group that we're part of? Where's it operating? And where am I individually operating? Where do I choose to want to be operating? And there's a sense with spiral dynamics that we are moving into this yellow theme, as they call it, but there's lots of people experimenting with it. No one yet has come up and said, this is exactly what it's like.
Yes, I guess this is a question that we're all here to look at. How might we cooperate with the shift as individuals and as members of the collective? So, I mean, these are some keys that I've identified. You probably can add your own. But individual levels, a lot of us are doing inner activities, I'll call them. enhanced compassion is an important one, because it's not just ourselves, it's others. And that's where the social awareness comes in. And on a group level, it's like being aware that all of us are not privileged enough to be able to escape the ravages of the COVID. Some of us are living on the street. Some of us don't have good sanitation. You know, and I think it's useful to collaborate across interests. And for me, it's integrating what spirituality means, however you define that, into secular space. The real master key, as I see it, is aligning what I call the small self with the true self. So at least from my vantage point, we're all kind of microcosms of a larger self that wants us to do things, wants us to realize certain things, and wants us to align with the direction of I'll call it the Galactic Force, or the needs of the planet. You know, we ask ourselves, how can I do that? What can I do to do better? What is the planet requiring of me? How might I help? And this is what we're going to explore in this call. How might I help my organization, community, or network align with that shift that David and I are addressing? And are we at a tipping point? This is you, David.
It is, yes. And it's interesting, when I was speaking to Angelo, it was going back sort of 3 or 4 years, I presented in Barcelona on whether we had reached a tipping point. And in this case, it was around the role of spirituality in the workplace. But why I'm bringing this here, for those of you who probably may have seen the Tipping Point book by Malcolm Gladwell, he actually makes there's three aspects for him around the tipping point, which I think are of interest. So first I'm going to address quickly is the bottom right one. He talks about the power of context. Human beings are sensitive to their environments. There has to be something that actually they're responding to and reacting to. So actually at this moment, COVID-19, wow, we certainly have the power of context. That's certainly front and center, and that grabs people's attention. So it's kind of saying actually human beings are sensitive and aware of this. And one very quick example I had today is on the wonderful BBC radio today. Someone was actually on there on a sports program, but it was an ex-sportsman talking about how he was doing distance healing. This was on the main BBC network. And I was like, wow. And I've seen some tweets on this and people saying, wow, it's great, it's being expressed and shared. But for me, that's part of the power of context, that actually we're sensitive, we're okay to have this sort of conversation. And people are saying they're getting more personal, they're getting actually more vulnerable, there's a deeper sharing. So this context, that's what I wanted to flag. First, I believe this context is here. The second one, I'll go to bottom left, is what he calls the stickiness factor. So actually in whatever you're doing, so this might be communities you're part of, is there a memorable message in that community that's moving you into action? And I keep forgetting her name, Angelo, so you have to remember me, the young woman who's been doing a journey with climate change.
Greta.
Across the world, really, it's this aspect that she had this stickiness factor, that actually she's got a memorable message that people are remembering her, remembering what they're saying, and she's also encouraging, people are taking action because they're actually seeing it. So this stickiness factor is saying, what message you're actually showing, are people actually then almost gathering around it and saying, I want to be part of this? And the last one, which perhaps may be the most interesting for this call, is an encouraging one. He said for a long time, and I've heard other people talk about this, that actually it calls it the law of a few, but says there's a handful of exceptional people that do the majority of the work. And if I look at it from my perspective, it says, actually, do you know what? There can be big changes with very few people. And what he talks about in that is actually there's three kinds. And I know me and Angelo have looked at this. So one, you may well be, and I sense there are some on the call today, you may well be a connector, which from his perspective means actually that as we're talking today, you might be thinking, oh yes, so-and-so, well, there's that, or actually I can connect you with this, or you have that conversation, you've got a network, actually you can connect people, not just a network, you make active use of your network to make a difference. So you may well be nodding your head and saying, yeah, actually I am a connector here. The second one, which I like as well, is a maven. So actually you may be someone who actually loves digging into areas, you have such knowledge. You have a knowledge and understanding that you really have a great passion to share to others, and that can make a real difference. And the third one, which I prefer to call salespeople, is that actually there are people out there that share all this as a message. We actually, they literally, if we're doing galvanize, they galvanize people. They actually excite them, ignite them to come and perhaps connect with the connectors, to look what the mavens are saying. They're out there actually spreading the message. So he calls them the salespeople. So the reason for this really is, again, I would say, having delivered a paper on this, there's a real sense that these factors in this tipping point institutional model feel to me to be alive. So my sense is, you probably, if you've come on this call, you may be one of these people that actually is. You may be all three, but you may be a connector, a maven, a salesperson. And it's really just to say, actually, this is how I can make my difference. We're talking to Angelo before the call. Okay, this is my language, my understanding. But I love the phrase that actually we are all fractals, a piece of, we're all fractals of the divine. So actually we all bring something to the table that's different. So my sense for this call was really to enable people to further explore that, to share that, to get those aha moments, and to go away feeling energized for this change.
So if one is a secular entity, what are the keys? I suppose they're maybe somewhat obvious. I love this phrase of triple bottom line, which I've basically been exposed to relatively recently, which is just people, planet, profit. So many of us are part of networks here, and it's interesting maybe to look for a moment at the distinguishing features of networks. They're non-hierarchical, nobody's boss. Power is distributed through the networks. It overcomes the limit of siloed knowledge, inherently democratic, and it allows for diverse perspectives. So what is the network of light? And I really encourage you to use your own creativity with this in terms of what you think it is. I certainly don't have, I can't claim to have a definition, but here's mine. An interwoven web of networks of individuals, groups, and organizations that share a sense of universal values. Each node within the network has its own distinct identity and purpose. At the same time, each node is aware of its interdependence and ability to ask and receive support from other nodes or from the network as a whole. So one way to look at it is that there's this overarching network of light that unites all of us. And you could say it becomes alive, or it has a sort of a focus in certain different types of organizations, of which this particular list that I put is perhaps incomplete. So how do the network members align? How do we activate the network of light? And to some extent, this is what we're exploring in this call. I'm going to suggest a couple of ways that that members do. On an individual level, I guess this is the side to ask, how can we align ourselves to the network of light? An individual light, it's an opportunity for each of us to reflect on our multi-group identity. Being a member of multiple communities is contributing to my growth and the growth of all. So I also wrote, my multi-group entity is reflected in my purpose and calling in this moment. It's unique for each person as a fractal, to use David's word, of the divine universe source of all. So on a group and network level, a network of light is a gathering place where people can see the various communities who are resonating at a higher level of consciousness and can feel a sense or a call to join them. And David puts, listen and understand what purpose you are serving and what communities are becoming for you. So a couple of key points. Some of you on this call know that I spent like a couple of years in my life actually trying to promote this concept. I found that people all over the world had a similar vision. I found people in the Finhorn community, people in France, people in Canada, they had this phrase network of light resonating. And so eventually I abandoned my effort. And I had a key realization in the abandonment, which is that the network of light already exists. We don't have to create it. what we can do is we can recognize that it exists. And a way to do so is recognizing and acknowledging the relations that we already have. It's like you look around the room and you see that people are part of it. They're participating in this thing. So activating its potential is as much a receptive process as an active one. So depending on your frame of reference, if you think that, let's say the Earth or Gaia has a consciousness, how can you be receptive to its needs? And so from a place of receptivity, you can co-create and activate its full potential. So how is it activated, or how might it be activated? There's a couple of different ways that we're already doing. Robert, on this call, he has this thing which is called the World Summit Movement, for example, on the right column. That's an example. Robert's initial vision was to have a place where people gather. This has actually been done throughout history. The Human Unity Conference, some people you might be aware of that, which is a wonderful thing which would assemble every 4 years. No one owned it. It was just, let's celebrate being together. There's a long time, this is a long time you probably don't remember, but there was an outfit called the Planetary Initiative for the World We Chose, which exists. There's many examples of events that have to some extent, I guess, sounded the gong or has some sort of alignment with this network of light thing. And of course, you can participate in existing networks, of which are on the left-hand side. So we're going to move now to a more experiential piece. And the question asks, what might you do and what might we do to more further activate the network of light? And David, I'm going to put, go ahead, please.
Okay, I was just going to say, Angelo, actually, for me, this doing comes out of the being. So I get a sense, that people on the call are on a journey, whatever you want to call that, a kind of spiritual journey, where actually, I was going to say, Angelo, I've just started something called it's called Conscious Leadership Now podcast. And I'm interviewing some of the sort of leading thought figures, the people who are actually in practice as a leader. And one of the ones I had yesterday is saying actually is in a nutshell, being a conscious leader is knowing who you truly are. So I think before we jump into the doing, there's a sense of, do I know who I truly are? Do I know myself? Do I know my values? Am I actually living my purpose here? So it's almost like there's a reflective thing. And as also was discussed on this call I had, when we go into communities, we can ourselves, and I can do it, can get rushed into action. There can be a lot of pressure on us to be part of these communities. But perhaps we can just take time, a reflective pause, if we're in a great pause, just to ask, why am I in this particular community? Taking time to be reflective and to really know why I'm part of this community as a core motivation. What's my core motivation of being part of this community? And as we said here, you've probably all got multiple communities. So I think when we first had the conversation, me and Angelo were saying, oh, that's right, we've got multiple communities. How often do we take a pause just to reflect, not from the perspective, this is good, this is bad, but actually, am I still aligned with who I am and what the difference I want to make? And actually, what do I bring to this community, and how does this community also support me? And I think it was, and thank you, I'm just looking where she is actually on here, Elaine, I think, speaking about this Christmas tree aspect, which I spoke about on the earlier call, kind of saying that actually, I think when we see all these communities out there, and I'm including people that perhaps aren't yet part of these kind of communities, when people, I think the part of the network of light is actually making it visible. So I said it's almost like a Christmas tree, that actually the lights have gone out, but when you put a bulb in and they all light up, as I used to do as a kid, I used to go, wow! And it's like that, they get inspired, they get galvanized, to use the word today, to say, actually, I want to be a part of this community or that community. So it's really, how are we perhaps being members of multiple communities and then thinking about network of light? How are we really enabling this? How are we galvanizing? I'm guessing here, the change, someone mentioned earlier, for the greater good that we're all really yearning to see from a deep, heartfelt perspective.
So David, you and I talked about a task to give the group in subgroups, and I wonder if you remember what it is. And I'll put people in subgroups after you
Yes, I do remember what it was, and that was really actually if we can put them to subgroups, because you put me as a
Okay.
co-host. I'm not sure if we can on this one, but the
I
idea
will
was
do it.
actually
I'll wait until you outline the task, and then I'll also give some time limits and stuff.
yes.
Go
I'm
ahead.
just pulling for notes here. The idea was actually that we give people some time to actually just in a small subgroup just to reflect and to share what groups and what networks that you are in. So, and it does two things really. One, it gives you time to reflect on actually these are the networks I'm in, they're in, and perhaps why they are important to you. And then to hear when others have their sharing as well, what networks they're in and what's important to them and why they're part of these networks. And I think our sense was, Angelo, that actually there would be an emerging sense of people having perhaps aha moments of, actually, I need to widen my stance on my networks, or perhaps I need to do less, or whatever might emerge from that conversation. So it's really kind of sharing what groups am I part of, how do I contribute, what do I get out of them, how does this relate back for me, from my perspective, you know, what do I think of the network of light?
Okay, I'm gonna just sort of restate that and help me just so people remember it when they get in there. And I think how much time should we give people? 5 minutes apiece. I'm gonna put them in triads, David.
Okay.
I was thinking maybe 15 minutes for the whole thing. Does that sound?
Yeah, that's good.
So it's like, first of all, is to think about your own, I guess, purpose. Look up at the networks that you have, and please help me, David. The networks you are you still resonant with them? For example, I forgot, David, help me.
Okay, it's actually considering which groups you're part of. And then maybe actually might be the first time you've perhaps actually thought about actually, do these groups actually relate to each other? That could be an interesting thing, you know. Here's the groups I'm part of that are important to me. Do that, if I sit here and I reflect, do they actually relate to each other? Because you've got 5 minutes you're sharing. That's a reflective point. And then if you want to be vulnerable around, well, actually, I've just had an insight that I'm a member of this group, but actually, I don't think it aligns with where I'm feeling drawn in this, let's call it the great pause. I may well step down, or actually, I think I want to find a group that's about this area. So it's a chance to actually share what might be coming up for you.
I'm going to say I already noticed that there's certain people that want to connect with one another. Why don't you share through the chat your email addresses and all that sort of stuff. And while you're doing that, we'll move on. I gave this perhaps more ambitious task. David, jump in any time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's mostly like, you know, what did you get out of the call? What did you learn? The ambitious thing was to identify maybe 3 things that were common with you. I can remember one that Eileen and I was on my call, and that's that this time is it sort of intensifies where we're going to go, where we're going to put our energy into, what group we're going to belong to. You know, I mean, I for whatever reason, I quit a meditation group that I was involved with, not because they weren't doing good things. I'm sorry, Tracy, that's the meditation group you and I are in. You don't know that.
Angelo, I understand.
Yeah. But anyway, so this moment intensifies. Is this the right use of my energy? Is this the right group or network that I'm in? So anyway, that's one of the things that came out of our thing. Eileen, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
The flip side of it, is that sometimes something in a group that you don't think is going to be a great fit turns out to be just a eureka moment that inspires all sorts of loyalty and dedication. And so that, and growth opportunities. So sometimes you have to reflect a little longer on whether you want to stay also.
So I have the unenviable task of being a timekeeper. So please make your contributions relatively short so we can have some kind of decent closure. Anyone can come in now.
Okay, I'll share, Angelo. I was very fortunate to be on the small group with Rita and Sana. Rita is in Tanzania, if I understand correctly, and Sana is in Bali, Indonesia, although he's from Gambia, if I understand correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. So I was just very fortunate to learn from two people who are in different places and have some different background. And I'd like to publicly thank Sana and Rita and just mention that I'm sure I would have had a wonderful time in any group. I just feel fortunate to have been with Rita and Sana.
So what came out of your group?
Well, we had a lot of what I would call some international sharing. I don't want to speak for the other members, but they told me about some spiritual concepts in Africa, and which, I'm just a dumb guy from New York, so I learned a lot. I don't want to speak for them, but I learned a lot from their backgrounds.
Hi,
Rita, Santa, you have anything you wanted to add to close that out?
Well, this group session was with him and Rita was really nice because I also get to understand that he's a lawyer about to retire, and then it's more like we talk about the cultural concept of being an African and how our belief system changed about some few hundred years ago because of the Christian involvement of the Christianity and the Islam, the coming of the Christianity and Islam. But we were talking about more of the African concept, the belief system of how we connect with how we were connect with our own spirituality, and how we often seek guidance from our ancestors to do things. So it was discussion was based on that.
Yeah, and we have a lot to learn from y'all. So please, next group.
Hi, this is Kamal, and I was with Nolu, David, and Mary, and we had a very good conversation. And Mary definitely had many more groups, and she joined, and she was a part of it. Basically, I talked about the groups. My core group is family, then friends and relatives, and then my colleagues, and some sort of shelter homework here and there. Beyond that, nothing. So we were just, I had basically a little confusion about the definition of spirituality, because everybody has a different sort of a understanding or a perspective of it. So I was generally talking about that, leaving aside the religion and beliefs, which are basically bound by the rules and the birth and some things which may not be in our control, whereas a spirituality which is the common thread which binds all of us and includes us, is a consciousness and the compassion. And then it is much more inclusive, and it doesn't depend on any sort of factors which are beyond our control. So we can definitely belong to that particular spirituality, which is all inclusive. But still, there is a little confusion about that because everybody is looking at it a little differently. So yeah, that is one part. The second part is I wanted to ask you, Angelo and David, that how exactly we are going to go from here, what exactly is expected, and how we can contribute, this is my first time, so I don't know much about it. That is why I'm openly asking you and displaying my ignorance.
David and I talked about this briefly. I talked about it, which is that I think this particular meeting is the beginning of this particular conversation. So I don't feel that pressure we have to have a conclusion as a group from this thing. We'll just sort of see what happens. And I know this is a hard assignment, but I know that you got something personally out of your conversation. But if you could reflect a minute, what was common in terms of what you all talked about?
Common was, we all said that family is the core group. That was the most common and very close to everybody's heart. So that was it.
All right, who's next?
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Robert.
No, Wendy, I just wanted to invite you too, but maybe I can start a bit by, we had a great talk with Wendy and Rose. It started out more about the importance or the relevancy of the inner journey, personal growth. So going inside first, and then reach a kind of, well, I wouldn't call it a level in spiral dynamics, but some kind of maturity where you are able to deal with your ego and also with shadow work also from other people. And then from this balance that you have or find, this energy, this self-empowerment, then step into your energy to follow your bliss. So maybe Wendy, you want to fill it in a bit.
I'll just say that I was impressed in the small breakout group how each individual had displayed, in my opinion, an incredible amount of courage, because my two other members have consciously chose to spend their time, money, and energy pursuing what they believe is right inside of them. And that's a courageous act. So I was very impressed by the two, Rose and Robert, that I was speaking to. And I loved the passion that I picked up from all three of us as well. And there seemed to be a collective passion for participating in making change in some way. And we discussed that there are many different ways of making change, but that each of us were really active in participating in making change in the world happen in some way. So it was really impressive. I was very pleased to connect more closely with the two people.
Yeah, I just want to join with that about the passion and creating change and trying to do it in a conscious way. Like Robert said, knowing our ego and our shadow side and looking at the issue of leadership and followership, formal and informal leadership, and how to do it. Reclaiming projections, not thinking we know what the other needs to be or do, really being reflective and thinking about reflective citizenship work and global work, and bridging connections, especially during this time.
So I'll speak, Angelo. I was with Bill and Tracy, and really what struck me is how I think each of us can actually galvanize change in very different ways. So, for example, we had Bill, who was, again, really anchored in a spiritual yoga practice, but spoke beautifully about both personal and social transformation, and how he was, to pick up on Wendy's words, very passionate about writing and making a difference through his writing. And we had a kind of says, oh, you sound like a bit like a maven, as I spoke earlier, that actually someone's got knowledge that wants to share. But there was passion through that. And then we had Tracy, who really linked beautifully, connecting people and the land, and triple bottom line within there, and through her work with as a visual artist, making a difference in a very different way. And I think we both got a sense of, actually, almost in a visual sense, was being a sort of salesperson for this galvanizing change through her art, which is beautiful. So a very different energy and resonance to Bill, but both making change. And there was a sense, I think, and as Bill and Tracy can note, that as we shared together, something about the collective started to move, or it sparked each of us individually, and we started to move. Something in the three of us started to be inspired about other things, and we started to make other connections, I think, or taking something in a way to say, yes, this is good, this is positive. And I spoke about the number of different groups that I'm involved with, and really how, for me, this great pause is a moment to reflect upon, where do I choose to be? And again, I like Wendy's sense of, passion and taking courage sometimes to perhaps join a group which perhaps aligns with what I'm looking to do, but maybe it isn't a group I wouldn't normally join. I don't know, but it resonates with me. So that's for me what came out of our group. Well, you're on mute, Tracy, I think.
That's why I'm not showing up. I echo a lot of what I heard David say, and I appreciate how he laid things out. I do feel very, for lack of a better word, galvanized. I feel very interested in honing the direction and the energy that I have in this time, to keep it from being in a disempowering, fearful realm, and really taking it and honing it and loving what I love, and still diving deeper, making newer connections and solidifying the connections that are really working for me. That's something that really came out of that threesome for me. So really special, really good.
I don't know if everybody has shared yet, but
no, they haven't. There's at least one more group.
Okay.
And Mark and I are each seeing if we can outwit the other. So Mark won, so I'll say something first. I made him speak first in the group, so I guess it's my turn to speak first. And now we talked about several things, and we explored for a bit the notion of a blind spot. I think Mark first mentioned that term, and Mark, I won't try to speak for you, but I think we shared this notion that, well, I am active in this and this and this and this, and that seems complete, but might there be blind spots? Might there be things I'm just not seeing? And that, in fact, neuroscience says that it's mostly blind spots. And what we see, what we're aware of, is a very narrow subset of what's even going on in our brain, for example. And so, certainly without any kinds of conclusions, just wondering about what can one do to help shed light on those blind spots.
And I might chip in, there's possibly something about these different groups, because in a sense, if our groups align perfectly, we'd only need one. And there's something about needing a multiplicity so they don't line up. And one of the blind spots of that is that if I network with people who are like me, I never get to the other side of any of our political divides. So actually there's something about it needing to be chaotic enough to mean I'm in touch with people I wouldn't ordinarily identify with. And I suppose the domestic British one is, we were pretty much 50-50 in a certain dreadful referendum. And yet I know a lot of people who don't know anybody who voted the other way from the way they voted. And of course, that's really dangerous in terms of finding a way forward. And the same applies to the Trump saga in the US, and I think lots of other places in the world. And maybe actually the technology is wonderful at the moment because like-minded people can meet. But I do need to be speaking with the other people in my street with whom I disagree.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. The blind spot thing is a good, and at the risk of, that's why we need each other, because we're not going to see our blind spots. Other people can see them, and it's imperative of us to kind of widen our circle, as you addressed, Mark. so that we can have a wholer vision of who we are. You know, I'm mindful of the time here, and you know, David, I'm welcome to hear your thoughts. I mean, mine is simply, what did you learn, and how can we take this forward? And I'm going to ask David to stay on the call a little after this to see what next steps are. But anyway, so that's my thought. I guess my takeaway is this is a beginning step, and I don't know what's next. So I'll leave it at that. Well, I do want to make one ad. Some of you on this call have been through the sacred conversation process, which is a way to align to your higher self, or figure out what your you know, your intentions are and all that. So I'm going to be offering several of those. If you're interested, just, you know, message me and I'll let you know. They're free. Final thoughts. What did you learn?
I do want to suggest, because a lot of people are asking what to do next, is that we can collaborate in the Sacred Inclusion Network Facebook group. And I realize some people don't enjoy being on Facebook, and that's okay. You might just want to peek and see what's going on, but we certainly can collaborate and discuss ideas and share ideas about next steps, or how to evolve, or just discuss where we are in our own personal journeys together. And maybe some magic will happen out of those connections and conversations.
I think I would echo that, Wendy, and I would be very curious, would love to see, you know, if people join that group, to see what insights have arisen within this time, and perhaps even outside of this time, because I'm a great believer that an insight or aha can occur at any time. And it might well be that just today a little seed's been planted, and suddenly you might be doing whatever. You might be cooking the tea and something just drops in, you go, ah, that's what we were talking about, and that's what's important. So I would just be curious. I'd love if people have those sort of insights willing to share. It'd be wonderful to see.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would love to have a continuance or next conversation with you guys, because there's so much more to share, and just trying to visualize it from the caterpillar and the butterfly process, we all know it, right? So I'm now currently active with a lot of other people, of course, people like you, in 5 or 6 sort of, well, not the same, but sort of the same platforms, the same of groups forming, clustering, and you can see in this whole process that the imaginary cells are putting their energies together, and speaking in terms of Barbara Marx Hubbard, the imaginary discs are forming. And I can see that happening in the 3 pillars of activism. If you want to know more about it, maybe you already do, like we can share in the next conversation. But you can see these groups aligning, finding a direction and alignment. That's really a great thing that's happening now. So we're well on our way. So all is fine in divine time. That's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
So I was thinking, Angelo, I don't know if you want to bring up the very last slide that we got. Oh, you're on mute there, Angelo.
David, everybody didn't check out. Should
right,
we
okay.
do that first? Yeah.
Yeah.
So please, maybe one thing you learned or pass, anything. So I'd just like to get everybody's voice in the room.
I came late. I apologize. And I celebrate this opportunity for people to find, we talked about it in our small group. It's like a tribe. It's an ally group. I'm a member. I'm like Robert, I'm a member of many. So it strengthens me and makes me feel less alone and keeps me moving when sometimes you feel like it's too much. So I applaud this opportunity to find people who are awake.
Oh, I told Angelo that I found this refreshing because I live in a senior building. And so even to go outside, to get outside, okay, I have to when I open my apartment door, I have to have on a mask and gloves and, you know, be so bundled up and you know, like, I'm somebody who likes to hug people, okay? And now it's like, oh, you got to be 6 feet away. And so this was refreshing. This was very, very refreshing.
I don't know. Oh, continue.
Please, please.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just felt motivated to make more connections, and you know, so that makes me look at the reason why I tend not to, which has been an ongoing issue for many years. Please.
Yeah, am I on mute? Yeah, no. I think I was sharing something in a meeting like this recently, and I said having a global sitting room like this, and then sometimes feeling the safety of removing masks that we wear every day is so liberating. So I just wanted to share exactly the same thing, that as we want to galvanize change, the more we can now be a little bit more of ourselves to each other across continents, across the seas, I think the change can even happen much quicker. So thank you, Angelo. It's an evolving journey for me. And I really learned a lot on this call. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to join with that. I agree, Rita. I think that's beautiful. And when I think about, someone said the word awakening, it's an every moment, every day process of being curious and reflective. And so I guess that's my checkout, is that I'm hoping to be open to awaken more and more.
So thank you, Angelo. I just wanted to share this one as a closing inspiration. And again, it ties in what Eileen was saying about, it talks about freedom in this time of shelter or lockdown. But it also, for me, actually speaks of the hope of the light. We've been speaking about a network of light. So I'll just share this. And it's from John O'Donnell, who died fairly recently, but he's someone who really deeply inspired me. He was based in Ireland. He said, one of my images of the divine is that it is light in some form, and that the divine light works very tenderly with human freedom. If you don't believe that the light is there, you will experience the darkness. But if you believe the light is there, and if you call the light towards you, and if you call it into whatever you're involved in, the light will never fail you.
Can you share that with all of us?
Sure.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Beautiful quote.
I have to write it down or I'll forget.
Yes.
All right. Anyway, thank you very much for being with us today. This is going to be processing this for a little while, but we'll see what the next steps are. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully you can share a little bit of this, the spirit of what you got to other people that you come into contact today going forward. Namaste, as they say. See you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.